The morning sun rose gently over Arlington National Cemetery, painting the sky with soft shades of gold and blue. Visitors gathered near the tomb of the unknown soldier, where silence filled the air. Each person stood with quiet respect, watching the tomb guard march with perfect rhythm. His movements were sharp, steady, and filled with purpose. Every step he took echoed softly against the marble ground. People barely breathed, afraid to disturb the sacred peace of the place. Among the crowd was a little boy named Daniel, standing beside his grandmother. He was only 6 years old, with bright eyes and a curious heart. His mother had gone to get a bottle of water, promising to be right back. Daniel tried to be brave, holding his grandmother's hand tightly as he watched the guard march back and forth. The ceremony fascinated him, the guard's shining shoes, the crisp uniform, and the serious look on his face. Everything seemed so important, so powerful. For several minutes, everything stayed quiet and calm. The guard continued his careful steps, turning with perfect timing. The visitors admired his discipline, unaware that something small but important was about to happen. Daniel suddenly looked around and noticed his mother wasn't back yet. He scanned the crowd, hoping to see her face, but all he saw were strangers standing still and silent. His little heart began to beat faster. He tugged on his grandmother's hand, whispering, "Grandma, where's Mommy?" She smiled gently and said, "She'll be back in a moment, sweetheart." But as the minutes passed, Daniel grew more worried. The crowd was large and he couldn't see far. His grandmother tried to calm him, but the fear in his young heart kept growing. Finally, he couldn't hold it in anymore. His small voice, filled with panic, echoed across the quiet cemetery. "Where's my mom?" he cried. The sound was so unexpected that the crowd froze. Every person turned their eyes toward the little boy. It was the kind of place where no one spoke, not even whispered. But now a child's voice had broken that long-standing silence. The tomb guard had just finished a turn when he heard the cry. He stopped mid-step. His training told him to stay focused. Nothing was supposed to break his concentration. He had learned to ignore everything, from loud noises to sudden movements. But this sound was different. It wasn't a distraction. It was the voice of a scared child. For a few seconds, the world seemed to pause. The boy's sobs filled the air, small and trembling. The guard's grip tightened around his rifle. His mind raced between two duties, one to protect the sanctity of the tomb and the other to respond to a human need right in front of him. Visitors could feel the tension. No one dared to move or speak. The guard's eyes shifted slightly toward the child, though his body remained perfectly straight. Behind his dark sunglasses, no one could see the emotion in his eyes, but deep inside, something stirred. He was trained to honor the fallen, to represent respect and discipline. But he was also a man with a heart that could not ignore a frightened child. The boy's grandmother tried to comfort him, kneeling beside him, but Daniel only cried harder. "I want my mom," he shouted, tears running down his cheeks. The guard took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling slowly. Breaking protocol was a serious matter, but in that moment, the rules seemed small compared to the child's fear. The guard slowly turned his head toward the boy. The crowd noticed. Some visitors covered their mouths, realizing what was happening. Others simply watched, their hearts pounding. The guard took a measured step forward, then another. Each sound of his foot hitting the ground echoed louder than before. The boy's crying grew softer as he noticed the tall soldier walking toward him. The guard's presence was calm but powerful. Even without speaking, he seemed to bring a sense of safety. Daniel stopped sobbing for a second, staring up at the figure in front of him. The guard halted a few feet away, his expression unreadable. For a moment he simply stood there, the silence between them heavy with meaning. It was as if time had stopped. The guard, the boy, and the entire crowd frozen in a shared moment of understanding. The grandmother looked up at the soldier, unsure of what to say. She whispered an apology, but he gave a slow shake of his head, a silent gesture telling her it was all right. His duty was to stand watch, but his humanity told him something else. That compassion could be just as honorable as discipline. Even though he hadn't spoken a single word yet, his actions spoke louder than any rule book ever could. The crowd, once worried about the break in protocol, now felt something different. They saw not just a soldier following orders, but a protector, a symbol of both strength and kindness. In the quiet that followed, the guard lowered his rifle slightly, resting it at his side. His voice was deep but gentle as he finally spoke. "It's okay, little one." The words were soft, but they carried through the still air. The boy sniffled and looked up, surprised that the soldier had talked to him. It was rare, almost unheard of, for a tomb guard to speak during duty. A small smile returned to Daniel's face, though he still wiped his tears. The guard's calmness seemed to comfort him. He didn't fully understand what the tomb meant or what the ceremony was for, but he knew the man before him cared. Around them, the crowd remained silent, not out of rule this time, but out of respect. They had just witnessed something rare and beautiful, a soldier choosing compassion over strictness, humanity over habit. In that moment, the tomb guard stood not just as a protector of the fallen, but as a guardian of the living. His eyes softened behind his glasses, and though no one could see it, a quiet warmth spread through him. Daniel's grandmother whispered, "Thank you," her voice trembling. The guard gave a slight nod before turning back toward the tomb. He resumed his post, his steps once again measured and perfect. But now, each movement carried something new, a quiet reminder that behind every uniform beats a human heart. The crowd stayed unusually still, even after the ceremony resumed. No one looked away, no one checked their phones, and no one spoke. They all felt they had seen something truly meaningful, an act of kindness that went beyond rules and reached something far deeper. The simple, powerful bond of care and respect. The little boy held his grandmother's hand again, calmer now, his eyes fixed on the soldier who had made him feel safe. Though he didn't know it, he had just become part of a story that everyone there would remember for years to come. The day a tomb guard broke his silence, not for glory, not for attention, but for the sake of a child's tears. The little boy, Daniel, still stood close to his grandmother, clutching her hand tightly. Though the tomb guard had approached him and reassured him with a few gentle words, the boy's eyes remained wide with worry. He didn't fully understand the ceremony, or why everyone was so silent, but he could feel the strange mixture of awe and fear surrounding him. The crowd around them watched in quiet suspense, unsure of what would happen next. Everyone sensed that something unusual was unfolding, something far beyond the ordinary order of the day. The tomb guard, whose name was Sergeant Miller, felt the weight of the moment pressing heavily on him. Years of training had taught him to ignore distractions and maintain perfect composure. Every movement, every glance, every turn in front of the tomb of the unknown soldier had to be flawless. Guards like him were chosen for their discipline, their dedication, and their ability to put duty above all else. Yet, as he looked down at Daniel, something stirred deep inside him, a feeling that no training could prepare him for. The boy's sobs had quieted, but the fear in his eyes remained. Sergeant Miller could see the confusion and vulnerability on the child's face. At that instant, he realized that his role was not just about following rules or performing a ritual perfectly. His role also meant protecting the dignity and humanity of those who came to honor the fallen, and that included a small boy who felt lost and afraid. He knelt slightly to meet Daniel at eye level, careful to maintain a posture that was calm and non-threatening. "It's okay, little soldier," he said gently, repeating the words with warmth and sincerity. "We'll find your mom." Daniel's lower lip trembled, but he felt a flicker of hope in the presence of this kind, disciplined man who seemed so much bigger than life itself. Around them, the crowd held their breath. Many had never seen a tomb guard break protocol like this. Their training emphasized unwavering focus, and rarely, if ever, would a guard speak to a visitor in the middle of a ceremony. Yet the people here weren't thinking about rules. They were thinking about the courage it took for Sergeant Miller to step away from strict discipline and show compassion. Some quietly wiped tears from their eyes, recognizing that an extraordinary act of humanity was unfolding before them. Meanwhile, the boy's grandmother whispered soft words of reassurance, trying to calm him down. "Mommy will be right back," she said, though even she could sense that a small child's fear doesn't always respond to gentle words alone. She looked at Sergeant Miller with gratitude, silently thanking him for noticing the boy and responding so carefully. Sergeant Miller remained still for a moment, weighing his next step. He could not abandon his duty entirely, yet leaving Daniel alone was not an option. He signaled subtly to another guard standing nearby. That guard nodded almost imperceptibly, understanding that Sergeant Miller was temporarily stepping outside the normal boundaries of their protocol. A quick glance later confirmed that the boy's mother was being located and would arrive shortly. In that short interval, Sergeant Miller stayed with Daniel, speaking softly, keeping the boy engaged and grounded. He asked small, comforting questions. "Do you like to play outside? And what's your favorite color?" Daniel's eyes brightened a little as he answered, his fear slowly being replaced by curiosity and relief. For the first time in minutes, he smiled, a small, hesitant smile, realizing that someone was here to protect him. The crowd around them noticed the change as well. What had started as a quiet moment of worry transformed into a small story of connection. Parents whispered to their children, pointing out how kindness could sometimes be more powerful than rules. Visitors who had come to witness the solemn ceremony found themselves unexpectedly moved, reminded that real heroism is often quiet, patient, and compassionate. Sergeant Miller glanced toward the nearby entrance where the boy's mother was expected to appear. He knew it wouldn't be long now. Even so, he remained vigilant, aware that his presence was helping Daniel feel secure. The little boy had begun to relax, sitting closer to his grandmother and holding Sergeant Miller's hand gently. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes, a silent acknowledgement that this man had stepped outside his strict role to care for a frightened child. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours to Daniel. Every sound, the soft shuffle of shoes, the rustle of leaves in the wind, the distant footsteps of visitors, seemed amplified in the quiet of the cemetery. Then in the distance, a familiar voice called out, "Daniel!" The boy's head shot up and his eyes lit with recognition. His mother was finally there. With tears streaming down her face, she hurried toward him, her arms outstretched. Daniel dropped Sergeant Miller's hand instantly and ran to his mother, wrapping himself tightly around her. The reunion was emotional, filled with relief, laughter, and tears. The crowd remained silent again, watching this tender human moment unfold. It was an unplanned scene, yet it felt as sacred as any ceremony. Sergeant Miller stepped back slightly, giving the mother and son space to embrace. He maintained a composed posture, but inside he felt a quiet satisfaction. He had managed to protect a small child while upholding the dignity of the tomb as much as possible. His choice to break protocol had not caused disorder. Instead, it had reminded everyone present of the deeper purpose behind the honor and discipline: humanity. The mother thanked him repeatedly, her voice trembling with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You didn't have to stop, but you did. You saved my son from being scared." Sergeant Miller nodded politely, simply saying, "It was my duty to protect. Everyone matters here." He then straightened, lifting his rifle back into position, and resumed his careful, measured march. The crowd began to clap quietly, some wiping tears from their eyes. People realized that what they had witnessed was extraordinary, a balance of courage, discipline, and compassion. The story of Sergeant Miller and little Daniel would linger in their minds for a long time. The lesson was clear. Sometimes the greatest honor is not in rigid adherence to rules, but in recognizing and responding to the needs of others. Even after the ceremony continued, Daniel and his mother remained close to Sergeant Miller for a few more moments. They whispered their thanks, and he smiled softly, acknowledging them with a quiet nod. Then he returned to his post, resuming the silent, exacting steps that had defined his role. But now each movement carried something more than precision. It carried empathy, care, and understanding, reminding everyone watching that even the most disciplined actions could be filled with heart. By the time the ceremony concluded, visitors left with a renewed sense of respect, not only for the traditions of the tomb, but also for the humanity that could exist within those traditions. Sergeant Miller's actions became more than a single moment of kindness. They became a story, one that would be shared and remembered, inspiring others to act with courage and compassion in small, meaningful ways. Even Daniel, though young, would one day remember that day. He might not recall every detail of the ceremony or the exact steps of the tomb guard, but he would never forget the man who knelt down, spoke softly, and helped him feel safe when he was scared. And for Sergeant Miller, the memory of the boy's fearful eyes turning into relief and joy would stay with him forever, a quiet reminder of why he served, not only to honor the past, but to care for the present. Daniel ran into his mother's arms as soon as she reached him. The boy wrapped his small arms tightly around her, clinging as if he never wanted to let go. Tears streamed down both their faces, mixing relief and joy. His mother, Sarah, held him just as tightly, whispering softly, "I'm here, baby. I'm right here. You're safe now." The fear that had clouded Daniel's young mind melted away in that instant. The crowd around them remained silent, watching this deeply human moment unfold. People had come to the tomb of the unknown soldier to witness a ceremony of honor and precision, but instead, they had witnessed something perhaps even more profound, the intersection of duty and compassion. The solemnity of the tomb was intact, but it had been softened, even enriched by an act of genuine human kindness. Sergeant Miller, the tomb guard who had stepped forward to comfort Daniel, took a step back. His posture remained rigid and precise, as if nothing had changed, but his mind felt lighter. He had made a choice that went against decades of strict protocol, yet it had been the right choice. He had upheld the essence of his duty, which was to protect and honor, while also showing the simple, quiet power of humanity. Sarah knelt down slightly to embrace her son fully. Daniel buried his face into her shoulder, taking comfort in the familiar warmth and smell of home. His tiny body relaxed, and the tension that had gripped him for what felt like an eternity disappeared. "I was so scared, Mommy," he murmured. "I didn't know where you were." "I know, sweetheart," she replied, brushing his hair gently from his face. "I'm so sorry. I'll never leave you like that again." Her voice trembled, carrying the emotion of a mother's relief and love. Even the people who had been standing quietly observing the ceremony felt a tug in their hearts. The moment was raw, real, and beautiful in its simplicity. Sergeant Miller watched them for a few seconds longer, ensuring the boy was truly safe. Then he straightened, returning to his post. Every step he took back toward the tomb was measured and precise, each one echoing the discipline that made him a tomb guard. Yet something had changed in the way he moved. There was a subtle warmth, a gentle confidence that came from knowing he had done the right thing, that he had honored life itself as much as the ceremony demanded. The crowd began to clap softly, not the loud applause of celebration, but quiet, heartfelt appreciation for what they had just witnessed. People nodded to one another, some whispering words like, "That was amazing," or "What a kind man." Many had come to Arlington National Cemetery for the ceremony, expecting to leave quietly after watching the guards' perfect routine. Instead, they left with a story, a memory, a lesson about courage, compassion, and humanity. Daniel's mother knelt beside him and whispered words of comfort and love, ensuring he understood he was safe and cherished. The little boy's face gradually transformed from fear to curiosity, and finally to a small, shy smile. He glanced up at Sergeant Miller as if to say thank you without words. Sergeant Miller nodded slightly, acknowledging the silent gratitude. It was a brief exchange, but it held more meaning than any speech could convey. As Daniel and his mother walked slowly away from the tomb, still holding hands, Sergeant Miller resumed his march. Every movement was deliberate, every step in rhythm with the centuries of tradition he represented. Yet in his heart, he carried the memory of a small boy's fear and the relief that came from showing care. That memory reminded him why his role was so important, not just to honor the fallen soldiers, but to protect and inspire the living. The visitors began to disperse, leaving the tomb in the quiet of the early afternoon. Some paused for a moment longer, reflecting on the scene they had witnessed. Others whispered to their children about the importance of kindness and bravery. Parents held their children closer, feeling the impact of a small, simple story that illustrated a profound truth. True courage is not only measured by strength or discipline, but also by compassion and understanding. Daniel, still holding his mother's hand, looked back once more at Sergeant Miller. Though he was young, he understood that the man in uniform had done something remarkable for him. He might not remember all the details when he grew older, but he would never forget the way the guard had knelt down, spoken gently, and made him feel safe. That moment, simple as it seemed, left a lasting impression that would remain in his heart forever. Sarah, Daniel's mother, whispered her thanks to Sergeant Miller again. "I can't thank you enough," she said, tears in her eyes. "You didn't have to stop, but you did. You made him feel safe when he was scared." Sergeant Miller nodded quietly, offering a simple, respectful response. "It's my duty to protect," he said. "Everyone matters here. The interaction concluded with dignity and grace. Sergeant Miller returned fully to his ceremonial duties, marching with the precision and discipline that had been his hallmark. Yet the small act of kindness lingered, not just in his mind but in the minds of every person who had witnessed it. Visitors left Arlington National Cemetery carrying the story with them, sharing it with friends, family, and colleagues, inspired by the rare example of courage tempered with compassion. Later that evening, Sergeant Miller reflected on the day. He thought about Daniel's frightened eyes, the boy's tear-streaked cheeks, and the moment his small hand had reached for comfort. That single act of stepping beyond protocol felt heavier and more significant than any other duty he had ever performed. It reminded him that being a soldier, a guard, or a protector was about more than rules. It was about making choices that respected life, safety, and humanity. For Daniel, the memory would remain etched in his mind. Years later, he would recall the day not for the ceremony itself, but for the soldier who had seen a scared little boy and chosen to care. It would be a story he carried with him, a lesson about the power of empathy and courage, and a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts can have the greatest impact. As the sun began to set over Arlington National Cemetery, its golden light casting long shadows across the grounds, Sergeant Miller stood silently at the tomb once more. His steps were measured, precise, and unwavering. Yet behind the rigid discipline there was a quiet warmth, the knowledge that he had done something meaningful, something that honored not just the past but also the present, not just the unknown soldiers but also the living, breathing souls who came to honor them. The story of that day, of the boy's cry and the guard's compassion, would ripple outward. Visitors would share it, retell it, and remember it for years. And Sergeant Miller, the tomb guard who chose humanity in a moment of protocol, would carry it with him quietly, as a reminder of why he served. Because in the end, true honor is measured not only by adherence to rules, but by the courage to act with kindness even when no one expects it. And for Daniel, for his mother, and for the crowd that witnessed it, Sergeant Miller's choice would stand as a timeless example of heart, courage, and humanity intertwined.